Either they're mocking the religion of Islam, which is un-Christian, we don't do that as Catholics, or they're sincerely incorporating Islamic elements of that faith into the faith of Freemasonry. Either way, you have a problem.
And I want to say that you know this from experience because you went through not only the first 3 degrees, but then you went on into the College of Freemasonry, which is the Scottish Rite, the optional degrees, all the way up to becoming a Shriner yourself. So you are well familiar. You were having misgivings at that very first degree, which is the entered apprentice degree. What is the name of the next 2 degrees? And it's worth mentioning here, and I'm just going to interject this, that those first 3 degrees, there's nothing higher than that 3rd degree. The rest are optional degrees, right?
That's correct. The next degree is the Fellowcraft degree, and then the 3rd degree, which is the highest degree in Freemasonry, is the Master Mason degree. Now, numerically, there are degrees higher. For example, I received the 32nd degree in the Scottish Rite. But the higher degrees are optional degrees, and they simply amplify the teachings that you learn in the first 3 degrees. So a 3rd degree Mason is the highest Mason. And the 3rd degree is the highest degree, Johnnette, because it teaches what Masonry calls its most sublime doctrine, the doctrine of the resurrection of the body. And I know people are shocked when I talk about that, but there is nothing more explicit in Masonic ritual than Freemasonry's belief in bodily resurrection, which it exemplifies in a rite called the Hiramic Legend. It's a death, burial, and resurrection rite that was conceived back in the 1700s. It uses Hiram Abiff, who is actually an historical character of the Bible who worked on King Solomon's temple, but they converted into something else. It's non-historical. And to make a long story short, the candidate, to his surprise, goes through this allegorical drama where he's hit over the head with a padded setting maul, like a mallet, a mason's working tool, knocked off his feet, lands on the floor. Ultimately, the Masons pray over him a prayer of everlasting salvation, and then he's raised up from a dead level to a living perpendicular. And I know you, with your background on New Age research, you can immediately detect the New Age and even the occultic philosophies that are embodied in that pagan ritual. I mean, this clearly is a pagan ritual now being performed by men throughout the world in their Masonic lodges. And after that man is raised up, the ritual says that this may be literally the raising of the candidate to his feet, but symbolically it testifies to Freemasonry's belief in the resurrection of the body and the immortality of the soul. And just as an aside, this was the doctrinal issue that ultimately caused me to leave Freemasonry, because I couldn't and you can't reconcile the fact that Masonry believes in bodily resurrection, but it does not believe in the necessity of faith in Jesus Christ, who is the resurrection and the life. And that's because you don't have to be a Christian to be a Mason. And as our popes have said, God has revealed both of these truths. They're equally to be believed. You can't hold to one and dismiss the other without being in heresy.
But you know, as you're sharing this, John, the reality is that, you know, Satan is a great counterfeiter. And what we've got going on here is a counterfeit resurrection. We're taking the sacrament of baptism here, and we are turning it on its head in a startling and dark way. And what we're saying is there is resurrection, but that resurrection is not coming through Jesus Christ. So through whom is that resurrection coming? It's coming through the God of Freemasonry, this grand architect who is the compilation of every God. So what we have here is a very, I think, a very pagan and very startling procedure that somebody possibly has no knowledge of the spiritual ramifications of what is taking place through that. And yet here you are, this is a 3rd degree, but you didn't, even though you had, that became the dividing line for you, you kept going.
I kept going.
Why?
And for me, Johnnette, the camaraderie, the social, the ties, the friendships, this was not a religious exercise for me at all.
Right.
I memorized these rituals because, quite frankly, I had fun with the public speaking, with putting on these rituals. We really had a good time. It was only when I started coming to grips with what I was actually saying.
Right.
Okay? And I've seen in my own experience, and we've talked about this offline, I've seen this many times where a man's intellect can become dulled by these teachings.
Yeah.
Their conscience can become dulled because they're conditioned over and over and over again that it really doesn't matter what you believe. You're okay. as long as you believe in the teachings of Freemasonry.
You mentioned, and I want to pick up on this point here, you mentioned right before we went to the break that the Catholic Church has spoken against Freemasonry in countless numbers of ways. Let's talk about what the Church says with regard to Freemasonry. I think anybody listening with 2 ears and engaging the brain today, the intellect rather, not the brain, can begin to understand the incompatibility here. We're beginning, I mean, you're so clearly pointing that out to us. But officially, the Church has taken stands on Freemasonry.
That's right, Johnnette. The Church has rarely condemned theological errors more frequently than she has with Freemasonry. We have had 12 separate popes over the last 250 years issue collectively about 24 condemnations of Freemasonry on the grounds that the teachings that the men are learning in the lodge are utterly incompatible with the Catholic faith because they reject or at least hold in doubt divine revelation. And so it's very clear. The most recent condemnation came under the pontificate of John Paul II, written by our future Holy Father, Pope Benedict XVI, then Cardinal Ratzinger. And Cardinal Ratzinger simply affirmed what the Church had always taught. Not only did that declaration claim that the teachings of Freemasonry are incompatible with the Catholic faith, but the document declares that any Catholic who enrolls in a Masonic association is in a state of mortal sin and cannot receive communion. Now, the Church doesn't make those teachings and condemnations lightly. Rarely does she go that far. That's how pernicious Freemasonry is, and that's how seriously the Church takes these teachings. It has declared that men who enroll are in a state of grave sin. They must get out. They cannot receive the Eucharist, and our canon law certainly encourages and prohibits them from doing so.
I'm glad you mentioned canon law, because there's confusion about this. And the Code of Canon Law was revised, if you will, not rewritten, but revised, I guess is the appropriate term, in 1983. And with regard to secret societies, the language changed somewhat. And so this has been, if you will, the legal loophole where many have believed that the Church changed her position on Freemasonry because the language changed somewhat. Walk us through that as an attorney, as a lawyer, and explain to us why that is not the case.
Excellent. As a lawyer, I had to deal with this myself, because under the old code, the 1917 Code of Canon Law, it was 2335, there was an express excommunication for any Catholic who joined the lodge. Stated in the law. Stated in the law. The new provision, which is 1374, doesn't mention Masons specifically, and it changes the penalty from excommunication to interdict, and we'll talk about that. But the reason why it changed is just for the opposite of what you would think. The reason why the Church didn't mention Masons explicitly is because it was trying to broaden the law to pull in other groups that promulgated teachings and practices that were harmful to the Church. So, for example, Planned Parenthood, the Ku Klux Klan. There are other groups beside the Masons that are harmful to the Church. And so the Masons weren't singled out. That doesn't mean that the Church changed its position. In fact, the change in the Code of Canon Law was the impetus for Pope John Paul II, with Cardinal Ratzinger's help, to issue that declaration saying, in spite of that change, that doesn't mean things changed. The Church still affirms her position as she always did. So the law was changed to broaden the application. We may also mention, Johnnette, there are other provisions within Code of Canon Law that attach to this issue. For example, if a man would embrace the theology of the lodge, and many unfortunately do, they would be in a state of objective heresy. Now, we're not judging their subjective intentions, but if they would embrace these teachings objectively, they would be heretics. Similarly, a man who would refuse the Holy Father's authority, he can't prevent me from being a Mason, they may find themselves, again, objectively in a state of schism. They've separated from the Holy Father because, again, these are part of the Church's ordinary, infallible teachings, part of her ordinary magisterium, taught always and everywhere, to which Catholics are bound.
As we're sitting on this set today, I'm very aware of the fact that our viewers are with us, our family of viewers right here with us, and I'm thinking there's a lot of people out there saying, John, I just don't get this, because I thought I could be a Mason, and here I am. I'm a Catholic, and I'm a Mason, and I just went through those first 3 degrees, and I didn't attach any significance, and I'm really not all that involved in everything that you're saying here. I really didn't know all this, or I really didn't hear all of this, or somebody else is saying, gee, I have Freemasonry in my background. Is this something I should be concerned about? How many people, once they come through those first 3 degrees, gather the amount of information that you have on the lodge? Do they keep going, and what is the deal with that?
Very few men really understand the teachings of Freemasonry. for a number of reasons. One, they've entered into the lodge for business or social reasons. They're not in here